Passive Intelligence Gathering, Part 2. In this nugget, we'll be continuing our discussion of passive intelligence with Part 2. We'll start off with a discussion of search engines and various syntax and various kinds of things you can look for to look for key vulnerabilities. And this is kind of a broad search for vulnerabilities out there on the internet, but it will help to narrow down your scope of your targets. Also, we'll take a look at a number of different tools that are excellent for gathering and mining information about your targets, and also we'll take a look at physical access. Sometimes you need to also get a visual look at where the entrances and exits are. That's part of the penetration test, is the physical security. Sometimes you need to sneak in someplace, and I'll talk to you about sneaking into locations. Now, search engines are a very powerful tool for the hacker in identifying good targets. For example, maybe we were looking for a certain web server version. Maybe Apache's certain version has a known vulnerability against it. Well, I can use a search engine to look for websites that are running that version of Apache, or IIS. For example, IIS 4 is chock full of all kinds of very bad security vulnerabilities, even with the most recent patches that Microsoft made available, and they've actually stopped doing that. So let's go ahead and take a look at Google, and we'll just do a Google search for IIS 4 websites, and we would do that by using this kind of syntax in title. Did I spell it? In title, yes. Colon, and then welcome to IIS 4.0. and do a search. And once we do that, we see all different kinds of websites that are using this version of IIS. Now I can just kind of take my pick of whichever one looks the most interesting to me and see what kind of vulnerabilities might be out there against this. And by the way, to find the vulnerabilities, I'm not going to go through all of those, but just, again, do a Google search for vulnerabilities against IIS 4. And there's all kinds of hackers' websites out there that are very useful in providing detailed step-by-step information about how to hack through certain vulnerabilities. Another good example would be searching for a machine that's been compromised with VNC. VNC is a certain tool that you can use, that hackers use, to remotely control systems. It's kind of like using terminal server, only without somebody's permission. Now, naively, some companies I've seen actually use VNC for desktop management for their regular administration, which allows them to remotely connect to a user's desktop and move their mouse around and move their keyboard around for them, and to perform all the actions as if they were actually seated at that workstation. The problem is that leaves it vulnerable to a hacker that runs VNC server, because they may potentially also be able to run that VNC client. And if I want to search for the VNC desktop, again, I'll go back here to my Google item right here, and I'll just do VNC desktop. That's the client piece of this. And then in URL 5800 is how we search for that. Once I do that, I see now several locations that are actually using some version of the VNC desktop that I might potentially be able to compromise. For example, I haven't actually tried any of these. Let's just try this top one here. If we click on it, let's see what happens. It's probably going to take us to a logon there, sure enough, and we have to enter in the appropriate password to gain access here. Now, I don't know the password, so I'm not going to be able to get in there directly right now, so no matter what I do. However, some VNC servers that I've seen, or VNC clients that I've seen, actually have a blank password. I don't know if that's because they don't feel that they're a high-profile target, or my company is just a little small company, nobody's paying any attention to me, or whatever, but a lot of them can be blank. I can also use my search engine to look for confidential information. Well, how do I know it's confidential? By putting right in there, confidential, or not for distribution, or something like that. And look at my search string right there. Not for distribution, confidential, and I'm looking for any sites that are end in .net here. So I'm going to just search against that, see if we come up with anything. Okay, confidential credit card information or something like that. Now, some of this might be innocuous, and it might actually be public information that they just don't want people to print out. I don't know what it is. But in any case, so we see that some of this is not for distribution and so forth. I'm not going to actually show you any of that because I don't want to get in trouble. But in any case, that's what the search engine turned up for us. If you know the names of certain log files, you can also use your search engine to search against the names of those log files. Or if you know the title page or the banner or the first statement that appears in any of the reports that are generated, you can look for those as well. For example, Nessus is a really good utility for detecting vulnerabilities on a system, and I use it all the time. However, when it creates a report, it says at the top of the report, this file was generated by Nessus. So I can use my search engine to look for that exact text, and that's what I did here. And I came to a specific location that identified a vulnerability on a specific IP address. Now, it's a private IP address, so I'd have to know how to get past whatever the internet-facing host is anyway. But in this case, we see that it's possible for this remote server to crash using the land attack. And this is an exploit where traffic is sent to a target where the source and destination port are the same, and it kind of confuses things and causes a denial of service. Or it just might confuse the TCP/IP stack and cause your server to crash. So in any case, here I've just found out exactly what the vulnerability is on this machine, so guess what attack I'm going to go for first? Right, the land attack. A couple of things we can search against here. File type, I'm looking for backup files, and in the URL of the website, I want it to show me htaccess or passwd, that's the Unix password or shadow file, htusers. These are all ways of different ways of looking for password information. If I do a Google search, then we'll get a few results here. Let's see, whatever this is. Very interesting. Okay, so this shows me, if nothing else, where to locate the password information. So if I'm ever able to compromise whatever machine that is, then I'll be able to at least know where the passwords are. Now, of course, they're probably going to be hashed passwords, but I can use a password cracking utility to figure out what those passwords are. Then finally, let me refer you to this website, johnny.ihackstuff.com. This is great. A lot of the searches that I've done for Google are pretty advanced searches. You might not be able to memorize all the exact syntax and stuff like that. Just go to this website. This guy puts together a Google hacking database, and he updates it pretty regularly. But if you just go to this johnny.ihackstuff.com, go to the Google hacking database, and he shows you a listing of all these different things that he's searched against, and then he kind of gives you interesting information about. For example, files containing passwords, for crying out loud. These are Google searches where they were able to actually find various passwords. And clicking on that, then I see this is the research that they've done, and if I just click on some of these, it'll take me to these results. So I just clicked on that, and here's where I would do the Google search, and this is the syntax that it does. So I simply click on this, and it's the same as if I'd typed that in myself. Once I click that in, then it shows me results for that kind of a Google search. And I'll tell you what I did. I kind of paused recording and went offline for a couple of moments to open up one of those links. And look what I opened. This was directly from that same page you just saw. And where'd it go? There it is. Look, super admin account info, username, super admin, password, by63bs. Guess what? This will be a very easy server to hack. Because they just gave up their username and password. How much easier does it get? Also, while we were offline, I went back to this archive.org website that we'd had trouble with earlier and couldn't get the pages to load. Here it did successfully search against CNN.com, and we got some old web pages that it was able to find here. I did look at this August 15th one, and indeed, you can see that there's a presidential campaign going on there in 2000. That's all old information. So we're looking at old information from the past here on CNN. Again, this is useful for mining for information that has been accidentally left on web pages that shouldn't have been there. Also, it does have a practical purpose. I once had a web page that I administered, and they didn't make backups of their web pages, and then they wanted to repost some old information. Well, they didn't want to recreate the HTML pages from scratch, so I just went back to this archive.org, retrieved an old web page for them, and in about 2 or 3 minutes had their whole web page restored for them. Let me also show you some tools that you can use to do your passive intelligence. One of those is a really good tool. It's called Netcraft. Really, it's a website called netcraft.com. And you can see I've already gone to netcraft.com. And again, I just decided to, as long as I was using CNN earlier, just decided to go ahead and use CNN. All you do is you search against CNN, and it gives you key information about that website. Now, why can this be useful? One of the key things here, really, is not all of this kind of information, like the domain registry and the DNS and all that, because we can find that in other locations that we've already looked at, such as whois. However, this kind of information can be very useful. Now, right now it says last reboot unknown. So a lot of websites will show you the last time they were rebooted. And why is that important? Because maybe there was a key vulnerability against IIS that came out last week, and Microsoft came out with a patch for it 3 days ago. The patch requires a reboot. But if this machine shows that it was last rebooted 30 days ago, then I know that they don't have the patch against that vulnerability, and then I could potentially exploit that weakness. Another useful thing here would be the uptime graph, however, and that does give me some interesting information about this server. First of all, we can see here that it is a Linux Apache web server. We can see the last time it was changed, which is December 15th. So that might still, again, be key information because there was an update or something that happened on December 15th. and here's the IP address. And there are a number of different IP addresses that resolve www.cnn.com. Another really useful tool here is ceh-ep7. Again, it's very good for passive intelligence gathering, and I've already run this against www.yahoo.com because there's several different tests that you can run. But let me just start over here in the back where I first got started. One of the things I could do would be to do a simple DNS query against it. So this is going to give me the canonical name for a Yahoo, its aliases, which of course is www.yahoo.com, for these specific addresses. So that just gives me some rudimentary information about it there that I can start investigating with. Here's the whois information. Not much surprising there. It's the same whois information I would get elsewhere. But here at least I can kind of consolidate a lot of different things from within a single tool. This gives me the IP address blocks that Yahoo uses. So again, Yahoo's not a target for me, but if they were my real target that I had a contract to do a pen test against, then I could start to do ping sweeps or something like that against the address ranges that they have leased. All right, what else have we got here? How about the dig item here? Now, what is dig, by the way? Dig relates to DNS, and this gives me returns a listing of all the records for which their DNS server has host records. So I'm getting their name servers here, so I'm getting the name of all of the DNS servers from Yahoo. It might also show A records for all their actual Yahoo servers. Some of these will also give you MX records, for example, for mail exchange servers, and a number of other kinds of records that might be interesting to you in DNS. Then here we have a trace route. A trace route is simply going to trace the packets from your source to the destination. It's going to check the speed through each link in that chain. And this has practical use in trying to determine whether or not you have a clear path to the destination or whether or not maybe there's a router saturated somewhere. This can also be a great way if you're doing a denial of service attack to verify that maybe the router that you're performing a denial of service attack is congested and it's returning very, very slow responses, for example. So that would be another good use for a trace route item here. Also, we have a whois item here, which is, again, the same information. I guess I went through that twice. But we also have finger command. We couldn't connect to that one. Rarely anymore do we find this enabled, but what finger could do is to retrieve information for you about users that are authorized to use this computer, so it could yield up names of users, and that can be kind of interesting. Again, not too many systems have that anymore, especially if they've got someone that's halfway intelligent managing their security. Here's a simple ping against yahoo.com just to, again, check our responsiveness to it. And then we can also check against the time against yahoo.com. Why would this be useful? Well, for some targets, you want to adjust the time as a hacker because you can do a lot of things to throw off security for that. For example, if you wanted to perform a denial of service attack against some servers, they have to have both the client and the server within a certain skew in terms of the time to be able to authenticate properly. So then, for example, if the server that's performing the authentication for the client is, an hour difference from the client, then it will not allow that client to log on. And this has to relate to, particularly, Kerberos transactions, which in Microsoft usually have a 5-minute skew time. So if I'm able to manipulate times on the server, then perhaps I'll be able to perform a denial of service so that clients will not be able to successfully log on. Another tool I'll show you here is something that I just got started. And now you don't want to actually use this tool in a lot of cases because it will get you caught. But if you're indistinguishable from normal network traffic, you can do a scan against a series of IP addresses to look up reverse DNS information. And maybe this would then return to me the names of certain servers or clients that would be revealing. For example, it might be mail1.xyzcompany.com. Well, even if I was not able to get their MX record out of the dig, then at least maybe I now, because of reverse DNS, have been able to figure out what their mail server is, and if there's a vulnerability against it, I can start to attack that. Now, you see I've gone ahead and entered in a whole ton of addresses here. I've got, like 30 Class C addresses that I'm scanning against. That's really way too many. So you would probably scan in smaller increments, and you can also use other tools that will scan more slowly if you want to avoid detection, because the person that I'm scanning against here, the company I'm scanning against, they might have intrusion detection software that can detect this kind of query. And then potentially I could shut myself out from them, and then that would be the end of that. I'd have to get a new IP address and continue my attack. Another good use of ceh-ep7 is to use it for crawling purposes. I mean, you could go through all the HTML pages and view the source, and then look at all the HTML headers and everything, and look to see if someone has left in some email address that's sensitive or something else like that. But that's very tedious and probably nearly impossible on large web pages or large websites or sites that change frequently. So what you can do instead is to go to Tools here, crawl the website, and then we'll crawl www.cnn.com. Then what we can do is to also mirror the website to a directory. That can be very useful because sometimes you don't want to crawl on a live website or do other kinds of certain queries on a website that could be easily traceable to you or that could make you caught. So if I just mirror it quickly, then that's not any different than any other traffic. There's a lot of people that are downloading the web pages. So if I download it to a directory and then study that directory locally instead, there's no way they're going to be able to track me, accessing my own local directories. And then I could do this, search the website for maybe certain email addresses that might be useful. I might also want to search for hidden form values that they wouldn't want me to otherwise be able to see, or I can enter in my own expressions or something that I want to search for here as well. So this can be pretty useful information, and you just click OK here, and it goes to work. So for example, I've just gone ahead and got it started. I haven't really run this before, so I don't know if we'll get anything useful out of this or not, but not likely because CNNs usually run pretty well. But you can sometimes get useful information out of this. So in any case, you can use ceh-ep7 for those purposes. Another tool you can use is a Linux tool called wget. It's command line only, and it's useful for downloading web pages again to your local hard drive so that you can study them locally. If you like to use Windows products instead, there's another tool called HTTRACK, that can also mirror websites for you. And by the way, not that I would ever do this, but you can also use some of these tools to download like multimedia content that's not otherwise available. For example, MPEG files or Windows Movie files or something like that that a black hat hacker might illegally download that, of course, I know you would never do, but you can download sometimes those kinds of contents that would not otherwise be available to you. And then probably even a better tool for that kind of thing would be something called Teleport Pro, which is, again, something you can download. There's a trial version. I think you do have to pay for it if you get the full version. So I think this is time-bombed or something like that. But in any case, at least it gets you started. And look what you can do. I want to exhaust all of these because you can read those for yourself. But probably one of the biggest items there is to create a browsable copy of the website or duplicate the website, including its entire directory structure. And with this, I have definitely been able to download files and contents to my local hard drive that you could not do from the website itself. You couldn't right-click on something or right-click on a link and choose Save As or anything like that. But using this, it's very, very easy to get whatever you want. And since I did tell you there's a Linux tool that does this as well called wget, let me just show you the basic use of this. Just wget followed by the website, and it will download the contents of the website here. And if I do an ls, I see that I've gotten the index.html file. If you want to go deeper, of course, and get more links and so forth, you can do that with the wget options. Another useful tool would be something that gives you satellite images. For example, Microsoft has their Terra server, or you can go to Google and download Google Earth or do Google Earth Pro. I downloaded the Pro version, which in reality you only download this if you really need it for like architectural purposes, engineering, real estate, that kind of thing. It's very expensive. But the demo version works just fine for limited purposes. And you can, of course, zoom in on buildings, and you can look at physical access. Maybe I want to look at their HVAC system here to see if there's an opening there. Or if I want to see if they have a security vulnerability in a door that's propped open, maybe I could check that. This is going to be probably not high resolution enough to be able to actually find a door that's propped open. We're not going to get that kind of resolution out of it, but you can at least find out where the doors are and then drive through the parking lot and see if it gets propped open a lot. A lot of times that'll also happen with people that are smokers, because quite honestly, they'll prop open the doors, step outside for a smoke. That way they don't have to walk all the way back around to the building where there's an open door that's not locked. So it's pretty, pretty vulnerable there. Just look where the smokers hang out. And if you're a smoker also, depending on the kind of business it is, if it's near other businesses or near the public, you can kind of hang out there and smoke as well, generate a little bit of small talk, and you can start some social engineering there as well, which we'll talk about in another nugget. Now, at this point, let me just show you a few miscellaneous tips, so to speak, for gaining passive intelligence. One of these is actually one I forgot earlier. This is one we could do again with Google searches. Here, I'm just going to Google search against HTTP. I guess I lost it. There it is. HTTPS://OWA. What's OWA? Outlook Web Access. And with Outlook Web Access, this allows users to be able to access their Outlook accounts from their corporation using a web browser remotely. has a very good and practical use, but it is also a potential security vulnerability. Now, a lot of administrators say, well, of course we're using HTTPS, so it's all encrypted, so nobody can possibly crack it. Well, that may be true. There's not many cracks that are directly against HTTPS. However, it's not hard to get somebody else's credentials. There's a lot of password cracking utilities and things like that we can use. So at some point in the future, if we're able to compromise a user's account, then we can get into their web access as well, because typically their logon credentials are the same as their Outlook credentials or their email credentials. So for example, I haven't actually looked at this, but it looks like here we have an EDU of some kind. We can just click on, if I click the right thing, click on that Outlook web access for them, and we see right there that we can then enter in the email that we've compromised. And we can also just take a wild stab at this. I mean, we might try using some default accounts that would be common. So, for example, there's always a John Smith somewhere. There's always a William Jones or something like that. So you can do W. Jones or whatever. You can enter in, starting with a password, or starting with an email address, and then you could attempt to, if you want to, brute force the password, but that's probably not very practical for something like this, because what would happen is there may be a monitoring of some kind where it will shut you down after 3 failed attempts or something like that. But again, if you're able to compromise an account in advance, then you can get into their email. And then after that, then you can get in there and you can pose as that user and send somebody else an email. You can just go through their inbox and see who looks important. Send that person an email saying, hey, I lost all of the specs to this critical account or this critical new device that we're going to make $1 billion with. Can you send me those specs? Well, there's your industrial espionage right there. You're able to get in and, posing as that user, get specifications for something you wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. Now let me show you something else you can use, and that would be something called 411.com. Now as I get into this part as well, again, this is not something I would actually use against anybody because I have my own personal qualms about the morality of it. But if I wanted to find where somebody lived and it was not otherwise readily available, but I did have access to their phone number, which is not hard to get, then I could enter that in here and do a search. Now, this is pretty innocuous. I just entered in Starbucks, that's in the area here. And so I just enter that in and I get their address right here. But I could also do that for individuals who might not want you to know where they live. Now, a hacker could then make some kind of a threat against them, a black hat would, or somehow extort them, or otherwise make them feel like they're pressured to do whatever the hacker wants them to do. And please don't do this. I'm sure that most of you wouldn't, but please, this would be pretty much over the line for any certified ethical hacker. Other things we could do would be to go to another website called www.crimetime.com. And as we go here, this is where you can do background checks on people. A lot of private investigators use this kind of thing. And this, as well as a lot of websites like this, do require either a subscription of some kind, or sometimes you can pay for it on a per-use basis. So you can pay $9.95, $15.95, something like that, for a single use. And you can do searches against social security numbers, all these different kind of reverse directories, mail drops, all different kinds of things that you might need to look up here. So other things you could do with this sort of information, however, I think there's government records in here somewhere, federal records, state records. You could do things such as looking up people's criminal history. Now, it's amazing how many people out there have actually been in jail. Probably if you work for a corporation, somebody on your floor has been in jail at some time or another. Well, they probably don't want their employer to know about that, or they're embarrassed about it. A black hat hacker would be unscrupulous enough and unethical enough to potentially use that information against that person. Say, hey, if you don't give up this username and password I'm looking for, I'm going to tell everybody that you did this or did that, or that you stole cars for a while back, or whatever. Now, of course, a lot of corporations will do a background check anyway and find out about that information, but that's not always the case, and sometimes people are able to cover their tracks in such a way, or use aliases in such a way that they're able to avoid that. And this just happened not too long ago with me. I was going to hire some girl to do some work for an IT company, and everything went great. The interview was great. She was very knowledgeable. And then on her application, we have a checkbox there. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? She said no, but we still do the background check. Found out she had been convicted of a felony. She'd done some kind of a theft in the years past, and we were not able to hire her because of some of the places we would have to have her go. Some of our contracts would require that we send somebody in that does not have a conviction for a felony. So, unfortunately, this can be used for good or bad purposes, or to keep you out of trouble for issues like that. Now then, here's another one, peoplesearch.com. It does a very similar kind of thing. It's a little bit more directly connected to looking up criminal records. So if I typed in, whoever I am, James Conrad, and you started the wizard, or you just did a search for criminal records, as you can see down here, then hopefully you wouldn't find anything under James Conrad, at least not right now. My lawyer says we can still get an acquittal. At least that's what we're hoping for. Let's also discuss physical access. Now, this goes a little bit beyond passive intelligence, because here you're actually being more active, and you're potentially going into places where someone could recognize you or see that you're there and wonder what you're doing, and you could get caught. So we're going a little bit beyond that, but in lack of having another place to discuss this, I'll just cover it right here. How can you get physical access? Sometimes you need to case the joint. Sometimes you need to go in and at least see where the server room is, or to see what kind of an office configuration the users have. Are they at cubicles? Do they have their own private offices? You need to know where different things are, perhaps where different kinds of network equipment are. You might need to go in there with one of those little handheld Wi-Fi detector devices to see if you can access where their actual Wi-Fi devices are. There's also word driving that you can do from outside the building many times. But this will help you get a more accurate picture of where their Wi-Fi devices are. Let's also take a look at how we could get in physical access then. First of all, one of the things I like to do is just go to loading docks. Just go to the loading dock and don't wear a suit and tie, because that won't fit in at most loading docks. Just look like any other worker or a delivery guy or somebody like that, and just inconspicuously go in while someone's propping the door open for the UPS guy while he's walking in. That's known as tailgating, by the way. So an employee might have an access card. They zip their card through the reader. The door unlocks. They walk in. You say, hey, hold the door. And you got your hands full. You can always bring some props with you. Bring a birthday cake with you. Say, hey, can you hold the door? I don't want to drop this. Well, of course, they're going to let you in unless they're a jerk, right? But it would be better to be a jerk and secure than to let a tailgater in. Another place I often look for would be construction sites. If they're expanding their building, they're knocking out entire walls. The front door is locked with key card access and security guards and all of that. But they're doing a construction project out back. Well, I'll put on my jeans with holes in them and a flannel shirt and a hard hat and walk on through because they think I'm just another construction worker. Now, depending on the company, they may monitor that more than others. There may also be camera surveillance. So unless you want to get in some real trouble, you got to be careful about that. But especially if you've already been contracted legally to perform a pen test with this company, then you can do that. That's your get-out-of-jail-free card, is that contract you have with the corporation. Also, always just try the front door. It's amazing what you can do just by walking through the front door and looking like you know what you're doing. So just go in through the front door, start walking down the hallway, get a drink at the water fountain so it looks like you're comfortable in the environment. And you'll be surprised where you can go. Another thing I always suggest, remember I mentioned the birthday cake earlier, have someone hold the door open for you to tailgate. That's a prop. Another kind of prop that I use at times is just a clipboard or some kind of a notebook or a briefcase or something like that so that it makes it look like I actually have a job to do while I'm there. You don't want to go around walking in the building just staring at all the walls because you look kind of conspicuous that way. It look like you're busy, but that you're too busy to really be stopped and talked to. Another example of this of using props is something that I use a lot, and that's camera equipment. I'm a photographer, and I really just love to shoot pictures. Well, there was a big event here in town in Phoenix that I really wanted to get kind of backstage access to, but I was unable to do so because there were security guards everywhere and so forth. Well, I just bring my camera gear with me, hang all of my cameras around my neck, look like I'm real busy, walk right on through. It looks like I'm a member of the press. I'm really not, and some guards will check for a press badge. But in any case, I just walked right on through like I was busy while other people were being stopped, and they let me through because of the props that I had. It seems like, if you have a really nice camera equipment, that it's kind of a magic wand that just says, let me pass. And I got into the event, and I was able to get one of my favorite photographs of all time, and I'd love to show it to you, but that would get somebody in trouble if I showed it to you. But in any case, that's an example of being able to get in someplace by using the props. And then there's also the social engineering. I talked about that a little bit when you're hanging around out the back door where all the smokers are and you're smoking and chit-chatting with them. Now, honestly, I don't smoke, so I've never actually pulled this, but I know a lot of folks that smoke that are able to do this. Smokers seem to be able to talk to one another in a different way or in a different level than a lot of other folks. And especially if it's a busy environment where it wouldn't be uncommon for a stranger to also be around, well, then you can use that cover, like I said. Other things relating to this entire discussion of gaining physical access to a building is that you must always have a cover story. I mean, if you do, you don't know what's going to happen until you actually do go through the front door if you're going to try that approach. Once you get through the front door, what if somebody does stop you? Say, hey, what are you doing here? Well, always have a cover story in advance. For example, have the name of somebody who works for that company and just say, hey, I was supposed to be here to see Tim Johnson. He's in the office, isn't he? well, then at least you have a name and someone say, oh, okay, yeah, well, just check with the secretary, he'll be down, or something. You just don't want to get caught with a deer in the headlight look on your face saying, I'm here to hack into your computer network. So just have a cover story. Another thing that I would often use would be going into the front door and I want to actually perform a hack against the company where I'm walking into. But I always look at the companies adjacent to this one as well. So if I'm walking into XYZ company, but there's also ABC company right next door, and someone approaches me, I'll say, yeah, I'm looking for so-and-so of ABC company. And they'll say, oh, well, sometimes people get that mixed up. Our entrance is right next to theirs. You walk into the wrong building. It's right next door, and people are usually real nice about it. Oh, thank you very much. I'll go right over there. So make sure you always have a cover story in advance. And finally, you're not always going to be able to get in. Security in some buildings is pretty tight, and you might not be able to get in at all. In fact, there's a few companies here in town that I've worked for, as well as some in California, where the security is so tight that I always have to have an escort with me. So I can't even go to the bathroom by myself. Now, fortunately, they don't have to be like in the bathroom with me. They'll stand outside the door, but they want to make sure that no one's smuggling out secrets or documents or anything like that. So you're always attended by an escort. In fact, at the last company that I went to, even the employees that work there, they have on their badge that they hang around a lanyard on their neck, identifies which department that they work in. And if they're crossing the cubicle boundary and they're going to some other department, any employee can stop them and challenge them at any time, saying, hey, you don't work in this department. What are you doing here? So physical access to outfits like that is pretty tight. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of passive intelligence, and this was part 2. We started off with the discussion of mining with various search engines. There's a lot of different kinds of syntax and a lot of different methods you can use to gain key information about vulnerable hosts. We also took a look at a number of different tools that hackers like to use to be able to gain information about their targets, as well as gaining physical access. Now, this is going a little bit outside of the realm of passive intelligence gathering, because you might try to get into a place where the general public doesn't get into, but nevertheless, it's a good place to cover that topic. And I'll show you some key ways of being able to gain access to a building where you might not have been able to otherwise. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.